So, good morning, everybody. I'm going to switch off that transcript thing so it doesn't tell me what or it doesn't second guess what I'm saying. This morning we're going to drill into the part of the subsidy assessment, sections 3 and 4, that are about which trade deal or which set of legislation applies when we're doing things. So deciding which rules are relevant for the case that you're looking at is quite important. We're also going to look a wee bit further into which subsidies are prohibited and that are an absolute no can do, and then some new things that have come in that there's sort of limitations or sort of specific conditions around that we just have to be a bit mindful. And one really key point I want to get across this morning is that no is not always the wrong answer. So by that, I mean, don't think that just by saying a no, that's the easy option that you can just pass it by. And it's not always, so sometimes it's better to say no and explain it if yes is the right answer. Does that make sense? Hopefully it will as I go through. So just a reminder, that's what I used yesterday, is when you're in the subsidy control assessment template, switch on that wee button in your home toolbar at the top so that you'll get the blue guidance notes. If you don't do that, you're kind of working with one hand behind your back or a bit of a blindfold, because you won't see these blue drafting guidance, and then you can switch that button off and then you've got your straightforward Word document once you're finished. And again, a reminder, please think about the questions that are being asked so you understand what they mean. Don't, as I've just been saying, don't just hit yes or no because you think that's the easy answer. Think about it and then just justify why you're doing something. So there's comments boxes at the bottom of both of these tables that you can use to explain any answer. You don't have to use it if it's straightforward, but don't be afraid to use that there, or use section 7.2 if you need to say a bit more. And as always, as I was saying yesterday, just keep the level of comment proportionate to the scale of the paper. So if you're doing a small non-financial intervention or a small programme child paper, then you're going to see a lot less than if we're putting £10 million into a harbour development or a new factory. And ask if you're in any doubt at all. So I'm going to come back to that, and I'm going to skip to look at the form. So these are the sections that I want to talk about today. Is that big enough for you all to see? Can you get a wee bit bigger? Let's go to 150. How's that for everybody? Can everybody see? There was issues yesterday. Some folk could see and some folk couldn't see the screen. Oh, and I also forgot to say, stick your hand up if you want to ask a question, or just stick it in the chat box. So we're in the kind of awkward situation just now where there's not one set of rules that are applying to everybody. So we have our schemes that we've designed around the sort of limited legislation that's out there. So we know that the EU rules still apply. So if you've got EU funding in it, and there's still some of our programmes that have got sort of EU funding that are running till maybe later this year or into next. So unfortunately, if you want to use ERDF or any other EU funding in your programme, we're still following the old rules of AGIBR, which in some cases is nice and straightforward. We know where we are with that. We've talked at various other surgeries about the Northern Ireland Protocol, and there's some questions, there's responses in the Q&A about how do you assess that, how do you figure that out. So best thing to do is, if you think your applicant has a base or a subsidiary in Northern Ireland, or if trade with goods or electricity market, so it's not services, if it's a goods-based business, then come and have a discussion with us if you think there's any kind of Northern Ireland connection at all. Because again, so for in those two circumstances, we're following the EU state aid rules. Most of what we do is going to be general sectors, and it's going to get caught by the EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement. So for them, we might have a yes there. There's the drop-down box for you to choose yes or no. So I think most of the time we'll be using a yes here. The things that are excluded are the audiovisual sector, primary agriculture, fishing and aquaculture. And we have a question mark over food processing at the moment because it looks as though food processing might be lumped in with primary agriculture in terms of carved out of the TCA and needing to be covered by WTO rules and the agreement. So we've got our external legal advisors working on the case to give us some clarity around that, because that will mean a difference between which of our schemes we use. And although we've got audiovisual sector not included in the TCA for simplicity, we have included the audiovisual services within our EDS scheme. So if you've got an audiovisual client, you'll probably be using EDS anyway. So for these sectors here that I've mentioned, what we then have to apply are the WTO rules. So they're much more vague. There are some specific things that are nice and simple around R&D support, for instance. But other than that, they're a bit more wide open. And you don't need to worry about that. But Melvin and Fiona and I are trying to sort all that out so that you can be assured that our new schemes will be covered by, will comply with the WTO rules. And that's why we haven't quite got those published yet, because we're still trying to get a bit of support to figure out what exactly we can and can't do. And to be honest, we're trying to get some flexibility in there if we can, if we don't have to be bound by the old EU rules. So the important thing for you to think about, though, is if you're doing a case where it's either a bit controversial because of the sector or the market that they might be competing with, and if we're putting in a large amount. So we have to be assessing if we're likely to do harm to an international competitor, and that's likely to kick off a dispute. And so it would really be something that would make a challenge towards us, and that the two countries would get involved. The country concerned would raise a challenge with the UK government. So it's that kind of level of dispute. So if you're dealing with any of these, agriculture, fisheries and aquaculture, and we'll let you know about food processing, you're going to be putting a yes in there, but you'll be putting, the best thing to do is put a comment down the bottom here about the level of assistance and that it's unlikely to trigger a dispute. So Alison, WTO rules are goods only, so not services, so consultancy services would not apply. And the inference behind that is we can do what we like, but we probably won't, because we've not been in the habit of just doing what we like. And then we've always got to look ahead to what's coming over the horizon next year with the UK legislation as well, because it will cover goods and services. And then the final one on this table is the free trade agreements, and they're increasing all the time. The last time I looked, there was 40 plus. I don't know if you've checked lately, Melvin, about how many there are, but there's loads of them. Not all of them mention subsidy, and we can't possibly get our heads around all of the nuances that might be in each of them. And the way we're looking at this, as I've said before, there's unlikely to be any sector or product or commodity that one of our clients would be trading in that is only going to affect the trade agreement with Japan or the agreement with Singapore, they're more likely to have a more general market. So if and we also have to assume that the free trade agreements are all comply with the WTO agreements as well. So I would imagine that mostly we're going to just put a no in there, because we don't know. We don't know if we don't know enough about what's contained in them to say whether we are or not. So I think we're quite content just to say no. Unless in the exceptional circumstance, you know that this is something quite new or unique and there's only one competitor somewhere else. You look thoughtful there, Melvin. Are you wanting to add anything?
No, well, I think in most cases there will be trade with Europe anyway, so they probably all have to conform to TCA. What we don't have much of a fix on is, say they were also trading with Australia, would we need to actually check against two sets of rules, because there is a trade agreement. The one thing about the trade agreements, they all seem to be slightly more generous, from what I can see, than the basic rules and the TCA. So in practice, we're probably not going to have difficulty. But it's a moving feast, really, as you say. We don't really know. There are about 110 trade agreements in negotiation in total, of which, as you say, 40 or so are agreed.
So has anybody got any questions on this section before I move on? So if you're able to just say yes to the TCA and move on, that's fine. If you're saying yes to WTO or free trade agreements, then I would just put a comment in saying about the modest scale of the assistance means it's unlikely to trigger a dispute. And you can have a look at some of the examples.
I suppose, Mary, the advice we should say is, if it does include trade out with Europe, if it looks like it's quite sensitive in terms of few competitors, or a major or a significant proportion of the market share, it's very rare, but if one of our companies was new and had quite a high market share, well, then the thing is, speak to us and we'll try and help sort out whether or not it's got a high risk. Yeah. But it's only sensitive cases that we know are going to be potentially distorting, because it's such a high impact on the market.
I suppose new and emerging markets, but also sort of declining markets, where us propping up a sector or somebody in this country that might put the kibosh on somebody in another country, where a sector's in decline, that would also be the sort of sensitive things. Okay, so section 4 has a mix. I haven't actually told you which ones are prohibited and which ones are specific, but I think the first few are prohibited, and the first two you're kind of familiar with, because you'll have seen those in the application form for state aid. So we used before, so we've just swapped out state aid for subsidy. So that's just making sure that they haven't had rescue or recovery, or sorry, this one is asking if they've ever been ordered to pay back any country for illegal aid, or so illegal state aid or illegal subsidy, so are they still paying back something. So we would tend not to award new subsidy. But again, come and talk to us. We've never ever had one of those, but if you ever did, come and speak to us till we drill into the circumstances. The next one about relocation, for the time being, we're still concerned in the current legislation with anybody that's moving either their site or a significant number of jobs, relocating part of the business with a significant number of jobs from another member state or EEA country, in actual fact, and our region. From next year with the new legislation, I think we'll be looking at relocations within the UK, because they're trying to avoid any kind of subsidy races and, Scotland pumping aid into somebody to move jobs from England or wherever. So that will have to be balanced with their levelling up agenda, and it's not law yet. So for the time being, we're only looking at relocation from other member states. Although in the application question set in the new application on MAHA, we haven't been specific. We've just asked about relocation, so that's kind of future-proofed that. So again, come and speak to us about that, because we're not supposed to support any. It's supposed to be prohibited if somebody's relocating jobs. Another one that's clearly prohibited, and we wouldn't do anyway, is provide an unlimited state guarantee. So we have to go to Scottish Government and get permission to provide a guarantee anyway, and we would never provide an unlimited one. We would always have clear limits on it, so that's always likely to be a no. Next one can be a wee bit tricky, because what do we mean by subsidy linked to export costs? Because we are all about trying to support people to increase their capacity for exporting, find new markets and all the rest of it. But what this question is asking, are we covering the direct operating costs of exports? And that could be goods or services in this case. So that would be the things we have to be careful is like international manager for hire, or anybody that's wanting to take sales agents. So that's salary costs that would be an operating cost. Or if anybody had secured a huge order from overseas and needed some working capital to fulfill it, then that would, if that working capital was linked to that specific order, that would be the kind of thing that would be prohibited. And this next one about domestic content, we could fall foul of if we're not careful as well. I don't think we would ever make our award contingent on them using local supplies or substituting for imports, but that's what that's about. And government ministers do it all the time, but they're encouraging and incentivising now rather than making things contingent. So we're not allowed to provide any subsidies on the basis that you will only use UK or Scottish supplies. If they choose to do that, or we say that we would encourage them to do that, that's all very well, but we can't make it a condition. Large cross-border international cooperation projects within the TCA, and I think the new laws, there'll be conditions around that. We're not getting too hung up on it yet, so just come and speak to us if you've got one, and we'll have a look at that further. Energy and environment systems is causing us a bit of angst because they're not really defining what they mean. Under the old GBER in the regional aid, it was very clear it was about energy distribution systems, so some of your big companies sort of on the grid, getting grid connections and all the rest of it, but we doubt very much it's aimed at like small local community energy projects or remote systems. And what they mean by environment systems, we're just not clear at all. So we'll be trying to find out a bit more about that, and more or less just following what we used to do before until it becomes clearer. And both these things are mentioned in the new legislation, the new bill. But given that these both contribute to the whole zero carbon agenda, they're not going to be too restrictive, but there's obviously certain scales of activity or certain types of activity that they're going to be cautious about. Again, if we want to help an air carrier to develop new routes into Inverness or any other airports, there's conditions around that. We haven't done it for a while, but if anybody's talking about it, then make sure that you come and speak to us first. And the final one I want to talk about is rescue and restructuring subsidy, which is different to a client being in financial distress, and it's different to the old firm in difficulty test. So rescue and restructuring subsidy sort of replaces our scope. We can do it, there's scope within the trade and cooperation agreement to do it, but it's above and beyond the support that we used to, or the considerations we used to do for firm in difficulty and for our viability checks that we'll do now. This would be reserved for either a unique client or a critical sector within industry that was going to go to the wall without public intervention, and there would be a high level of diligence done around their future prospects, and we'd have to evidence clearly all the reasons for public intervention and the social hardship that would be caused, and that there is a prospect of them becoming viable and they could repay they could fulfill the restructuring plan. We've only done it once and probably wouldn't want to do it again. But so it's rescue and restructuring. We've seen, Fiona and I have seen some COVID cases registered on the database, the UK database, that are under rescue and restructuring when they were just COVID resilient. So it is easy for people to get confused. So I think we've put a flag on my high that it's by exception. So please don't hit that one by mistake when you're in my high. Any questions on parts of the table? This part's the table. So again, use that comments box, comment any above if required. So if something's in an energy project, you might click that. Melvin and I have been talking to Neil Ross. Don't know if Neil's on today, but we've been talking to Neil about a sort of small scale community project to put electric vehicle charging points in rural areas. So that's getting into energy and energy infrastructure, but nothing like the scale that's likely to sort of trigger any kind of disputes. So we've put a yes there, but we've got a comment. I told them to put a comment in that box about the sort of unlikelihood of any disputes being triggered. So to sum up, I've done this slide just so that if anybody's looking back at the slide deck, they've got a summary of what I've been saying. So that should all reflect what I've just talked you through on the form. That's just a reminder, if you haven't been at one of these for a wee while, that all the subsidy guidance is available from the homepage on the intranet, and you can click, you'll get your My High sort of measures on there, and if you click on that button you'll get to the training resources page. I've started to get the refresher recordings up on here now, the YouTube recordings and the slide decks, and we keep adding to the questions, and we'll add Alison's one about WTO rules on there as well. And the surgeries will continue Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So tomorrow we're going to look at the table in section 7, you know, that we've turned on its side now, so that we can get a better breakdown of how to reflect what you're using the subsidy for, and that it's within the limits. Next week I'm going to run a special one. I'll probably do something on the principles, drilling into the 6 principles a bit more, and we're going to do a special session for programme staff so that we can look at how we use the assessment template for programme papers and child papers. So I'm going to try and split things out to avoid sort of confusion that we're getting with when you haven't got, when you're not dealing with a specific applicant, there's certain questions that you can't answer at that stage. Anybody got any questions? I've left 5 minutes today. It's better than normal.
Recording switch, Mary.